Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be painting the power axe for Dante. I ended up repainting this in the end, with the first part of the video showing the final version. I thought I would include the other version just in case it was useful for anyone not wanting to do the metallic version. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So this was the final version that I ended up going for in the end, and it started off with a metallic base to the axe. I wanted a really high contrast metallic, pushing the shading to almost pure black in areas, kind of resembling non-metallic metal shading. The darkness of the shading would also really help to show off the lightning effect later on. So I'm mixing AK black with Vallejo Model Air silver to make the mid-tone gunmetal, and then I simply apply more and more black paint into this to shade it. And this looks a bit patchy to begin with, but after refining it and going back over it with a few layers, I started to smooth over the transitions. If you don't want to use this method for the metal, then simply applying a few layers of Nuln oil over the usual gunmetal metallic like lead belcher would also work fine. I just personally find this method easier to create really strong and smooth transitions, which can sometimes be quite difficult with the traditional way of painting metallics. And once that was done, I ran a quick highlight around the edge using pure silver. Next, I glazed a mix of Cantor blue and black around the area I was planning to add the lightning effect. You could also use something like Night Lord's blue for this. This was then followed by glazing Sotek green within the previous stage to increase the glow effect. This is going to be the background glow to the lightning effect that I'll place on later on. With that done, it was now time to start painting the lightning effect itself, and for this I used Temple Guard blue, starting from the power node and working outwards, and adding small forks in the lightning as it got further away from the node. I then added some highlights where the lightning was intersecting and closer to the power node by simply adding white into the Temple Guard. I then glazed down some of the lightning on the outside of the effect using a very thinned down Sotek green. This just helped to tie everything together and make it feel like the lightning was part of the axe. For the skull node itself, I painted this in the same way as the rest of the lightning, so starting off with Temple Guard blue and adding more white into this for the highlights, and I would use the same method for the simpler power nodes that you tend to find on swords. Now for the second method that I ended up not using in the end, I went for a more traditional blue power axe. I started off by sketching in the highlights over a black base coat using Sotek green. Now you can either do it this way or you can start off with a full base coat of Sotek green and then place the shading and highlights over the top. There isn't really any right or wrong way to do this, and I just found this a little easier to test where I wanted to place the highlights. And I'm using quite thinned paint to begin with, so that if I'm not too happy with the placement, I can move these highlights around. Now I'm going to start adding some of the Cantor blue on my palette into the Sotek, and I'll paint this around the shaded areas. This method is going to look very messy to begin with, but I plan to heavily refine these blends later on. This is still just a bit of a value sketch at this stage. Now I went on to place a highlight using Temple Guard blue. Again, this is quite thinned down to begin with, and I'm just slowly building up the colour. To start refining these blends, I work back and forth between the Sotek and the Temple Guard. Using a slight stippling motion was very helpful to help smooth the transitions. I then added some wraith bone into the temple guard to further brighten up the highlights. I think I should have used a more yellow highlight here, something like Ushabti bone or even Screaming Skull. I think this would have worked a little bit better and added a slightly warmer tone into the highlights. But you could also just use Baharoth or simply add white into the temple guard. And again, I'm building this up with a slight stippling motion with a glaze consistency paint. Now to smooth out some of the shading, I made a mix between Cantor and black again, and then glazed this very thinly around the shading, building it up over a few layers. I really enjoy working with glazes in particular because once you get the hang of the technique, it's a very forgiving way to paint. I don't have to be too concerned about building up any physical texture on the piece, and it's very easy to correct any mistakes. Now for the final edge highlights on the axe, I did actually mix some Screaming Skull into the temple guard, I would say around a 1-to-1 mix, and then proceeded to edge highlight around the entire axe. And then I used this same mix to start to add some lightning coming from the power node. Again, building this up in a similar method to the first example. I find lightning is one of those things that's very tricky to get right the first time, and when working over a blended surface like this, you don't get too many second attempts. So I really recommend doing some test runs on another piece just to get the hang of it first. It's also very difficult to get it to look natural, and if you're not too careful, it can start to look a bit like a mesh or kind of like lava cracks. And that's in fact one of the problems that I started to run into on this version of the axe. So learn from my mistakes here and make sure you do a test piece first. I then added some white into this mix to highlight the lightning, so focusing around the node and anywhere where the lightning intersected. And I think it's around this time I started to realize it wasn't really going the direction that I wanted. And although it still looked pretty cool, I decided to scrap it and start over. I think it's really important sometimes that I show some mistakes and that it's not a bad thing to have to start a piece again. You can guarantee that every single painter has these kind of situations and it's very normal. And this is in fact when I learned the most from painting. In the end, everything turned out great with the piece and both Barry and myself were very happy with the final result. It was one of those projects for me that felt very high pressure because of the nature of it being a one-off piece, and Barry really had done such a great job with this sculpt. So I really hope this video has been at least a little educational, and no doubt I'll end up revisiting power weapons in a future video. As usual, thank you for all the support, it really does mean a lot. I've got a lot of exciting stuff on the way next month, and I'll catch you in the next video very soon.